Now if you do order the kit from me, I'm also going to have kind of a hardware pack available. The hardware pack is going to contain 2 of these 1.5mm rods, which are for the main wing spar. It'll contain an additional 2 rods, which are used for making the push rods for the tail. And then it will also contain some flat carbon. This is 9mm by about 1mm thick. You'll have 2 pieces of those, and you'll have one more piece. I don't have one trimmed to length here, but this is about a 3mm by 1mm piece. That'll be trimmed down, and I'll show you a little bit later, that'll be used to stiffen the elevator. But right now we're going to use, for the next step, this 9mm by 1mm carbon, and what that does is that stiffens the side of the horizontal fuselage. To apply it, we're going to use welder's glue, and we'll apply welders down the side of the fuselage there, and then on one side of the carbon, and then we'll do both sides, both carbon pieces and both sides of the foam. Once that's set for about a minute, you can, starting at the aft edge, start applying the carbon and sticking it down. I'm just going to tape this one on here. And then as you come down, just keep it centered on this 9mm carbon piece. Now if you don't push the carbon on real hard, you'll be able to pull it away, but once you've pressed it down, it's going to want to stay stuck. And so you want to be careful up here at the front. But what we're going to do, see if I can get this to where you can see it good, is you need to align the aft part of the fuselage so it lines up straight with the center of the wing. And the way to do that is pretty easy just by eyeballing. If you rotate it a little bit, you can place that carbon so it's right centered in the airfoil there, and then by pressing it down, that welders will stay stuck. I'm going to tape it in this case, and that aligns this part of the fuselage with the center line in the wing, which will actually be the center line of the fuselage. And so it's pretty simple. Seems kind of weird to start out with. It took me a little while to figure it out how I was going to do that, but what this does is this carbon really ties that tail in to the thick part of the wing here, and that really makes this whole section really strong. Now regarding the power system on the actual airplane, using the motor that I've got here, what I did on it was actually use a stick mount, which makes it easy for me to attach the motor to the airplane. It's just a cheap little plastic stick mount, and then they come with a little plastic disc that the motor mounts to, and in this case the motor bolts right up to this, and then that gets inserted into that stick mount so that and then it has a little nut and bolt to hold that in place. Now that does fit pretty tight in there. One of the little tricks we've learned is to take a knife and cut down on the board, push down on that and cut back probably 3/4 of an inch to allow that to open up a little bit, and that makes this go in a lot easier and out a lot easier, but it doesn't affect the clamping ability. As far as what I've done on my motor system, the slot in the fuselage has gone back about 1.5 inches, so the front edge of the motor mount here would go 1.5 inches back from the leading edge of the nose, and I would go ahead and mount this into this nose piece before I attached it to the rest of the airplane. Cut a slot for that so it sits down inside of it. I use welder's glue to glue this in place, welders on each side, and then when you glue the top and bottom parts of the fuselage on, this will get welders on that, and that holds it pretty good. But then I'll usually go in with some hot glue and run a bead of hot glue down each side there, and that makes a really secure mounting system. And then I cut an 1 1/8 wide slot in the leading edge of this nose here for clearance for the motor, and then before I put my top and bottom vertical pieces on, I'll notch those out to match, and also around where the clamp on that is. If you're doing a different motor system, there's other ways to do it. One way is to mount a plywood piece across the leading edge, have a hole in it for the shaft to run through, and so your motor will be mounted behind that front plate. Another way is to, instead of putting this in there, go ahead and do your 1.5" cutout back here, or whatever you need for the depth of your motor, and then mount a plywood plate in the very back, and then screw the motor probably through the back of that plywood plate into the back of your motor, and mount your motor that way. A lot of it just depends on what motor you run and how you like to set up your motor mounting system. Alright, now from here we're going to go ahead and finish assembling the rest of the horizontal parts of the fuselage. For the nose piece, again, welders to this side, and you probably want to mark where the center of this part is so we can line it up with the front of the wing. You'll want to apply some welders to the leading edge of the wing. Now there's not really a flat for that to really seat against, but there's enough contact there that by the time you get your vertical pieces attached and everything, it's going to be plenty strong. So we'll assemble that horizontal piece to the nose. Just apply the welders, let it sit for a little bit, for about a minute, and then stick it in place. If it pulls back off, just let it dry for a little bit more and then stick it back on again. At this time you can go ahead and attach your ailerons. Again, we're using welders. Apply it to both sides of the bevel. I just put a little bead right along the top. You can use your finger to kind of wipe that down. I usually keep, a popsicle stick and use that to just smear the welders down a little bit. Some people will actually pin or hold their wing in place and then apply the welders to the top. Either one works fine. And then I like to go ahead and attach the horizontal tail to the elevator before I put it on the fuselage. Now I'm just about ready to hinge my elevator to the horizontal fuselage, or the horizontal tail. This is a small 3mm by 1mm carbon that I talked about to stiffen the elevator with. And what we're going to want to do, it's 12 inches long, and it goes just inside of the bevel. You could put it on the surface. It's probably not thick enough to do anything, but it doesn't help the bending as much. And so by placing it, rolling it over and putting it on the bevel, hopefully you can see it there, it actually helps because it's at an angle. It helps both the bending this way, and then also helps with the any bending that might want to happen that way. I'm not going to glue it on in this case, or tape it for that matter, but just to show you, it'll go near, this is the bottom side of the elevator, near the bottom side of the elevator, but on the bevel itself. It's a little easier to do the hinging here in the flat, to make sure everything's nice and even and straight. Now the horizontal has a notch in it, and it'll slide right over the top, guys. But anyways, you'll apply your welders on the 3 sides, and then carefully, you should be able to flex it enough to where you can get that in place.